last week to do the facts of McDonald versus Chicago. I'll let you guess who that was. Is he around?
Yeah, I'm here.
There he is. All right, it's all yours. Tell me the facts. McDonald versus City of Chicago, 2010.
So McDonald's was trying to open up a new restaurant in Chicago, but they couldn't protect their Big Macs because they had a ban on guns. Yeah, okay, that's not. All right, Chicago and the...
Mistake.
So Chicago and the Village of Oak Park, they had a law that requires citizens to have their firearms registered. But since 1982, they banned handguns completely, so they hadn't registered a single handgun. And 76-year-old Otis McDonald, who was a retired maintenance engineer, he lived in the Village of Oak Park or Morgan Park since 1971. And essentially the neighborhood had been going downhill, being overtaken by gangs, drug dealers, and probably furries. He owned a shotgun. He was a regular hunter, but he wanted to purchase a handgun to protect his home, and he was denied the ability to even purchase one. So, and this is actually, I think, two consolidated cases. And so there were four elements that were challenged on Chicago's gun registration law, and those were that they prohibited the registration of handguns, which he argued was a broad handgun ban. And the second was the requirement that handguns be registered before any resident purchased it. The third was a mandate that guns be re-registered every year and another fee be paid. And then the fourth was that if a registration on a gun were to lapse, you couldn't re-register that gun later. It was essentially barred forever, that particular firearm, from being registered. So he argued that those elements of the law violated the Second Amendment, and Chicago was arguing that the Second Amendment doesn't apply to the states. And so the issue is whether the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms is incorporated under the concept of due process. And what was interesting was the number of amici in this brief. It was the fourth largest number of amici. And what a lot of people don't know, there was a collection of law and constitutional scholars or professors that came together to file an amici composed of both liberal, libertarian, and conservative constitutional law professors that argued against the law. So, I mean, if this case could bring together those three people, obviously it must be a good one.
There you go. You see where Mr. Grisham falls on this question. All right, so what's our debate? Second Amendment, right to keep and bear arms, is that a fundamental right? It's important because if it's a fundamental right, courts have found that it'll be incorporated through the Fifth Amendment or through the 14th Amendment, the Due Process Clause, Fourth Amendment. It's not a fundamental right, which is what Chicago argued. Then Chicago and Oak Park, Illinois, both. If it's not a fundamental right, it doesn't apply to the states. We've never had that total incorporation. All right. How does the court rule?
So the court rules that the Second Amendment is incorporated to the states. They held, that it was clearly applicable to the states. It was a fundamental right, and quite frankly, even though this happened after Heller, I think this was probably a much more important decision than Heller was, to be honest with you.
Well, you all remember D.C. versus Heller we did early in the semester, right? They based part of their decision on Heller, didn't they?
Yes, they did. And they found that self-defense is a basic right, and they went through several different analysis about it from many different legal systems from ancient times to the present day. And the court found that individual self-defense is a central component of the Second Amendment.
Now, this is 2010, and a lot of you all were kids then maybe, but it's not that long ago when you talk about constitutional jurisprudence. 10 years ago, we're debating whether the Second Amendment applies to the states. This is not an argument, from ancient history. It's a present-day argument. It's still a present-day debate that's still being debated. And here, relying on the opinion in Heller, where they said the right to keep and bear arms, or the right to self-defense, I guess is what more accurately they said. The right to self-defense is a fundamental right. And so given that it's a fundamental right, it should apply to the states. Justice Sam Alito, wrote the majority opinion, and he said some of the terms that we've heard in prior cases. Rights that are fundamental to the nation's scheme of ordered liberty, or that are deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition, should be applied to the states through the 14th Amendment. And since Heller recognized the right to self-defense as being fundamental and deeply rooted, then the Second Amendment does apply to the states. Now, Justice Thomas, which is why this is going to be interesting going forward, it's going to continue to develop in this area and in privileges and immunities. I talked about a moment ago that privileges and immunities clause, the 14th Amendment, has the slaughterhouse cases basically meant that it means nothing. Well, Clarence Thomas in his dissent here says, well, I agree with the result, but we should say that it's because it's a privilege and immunity of citizenship.
I think Justice Thomas makes a great argument because, and there needs to be a case on the Privileges and Immunities Clause as it relates to the Second Amendment, because as it stands right now, if you drive from California to Florida, you can become a felon at least 3 times by carrying the same handgun.
Yeah, and he seems really eager to have a case where he says, I agree with the decision here, but really the more appropriate avenue to protect these rights is the Privileges and Immunities Clause. And so he's eager to get that case. As we'll see in the next case, Justice Gorsuch is also, seems like he's eager to get that case. I don't know how many justices will be before it, and really does it matter if everything's been incorporated through the due process clause. I'm not sure how much it matters, but Alito did make the point that our ruling, specifically he said, our ruling in the slaughterhouse cases, we rejected the use of the Privileges and Immunities Clause for the purpose of incorporating these rights to the states. Said that's still good law. It's long since decided. Now we can talk about stare decisis and following prior precedent, but long since decided, as we've seen in any number of areas, means nothing, and probably should mean nothing. We just saw Palco was executed. Just 3 decades later, they changed the law, changed the rule, changed the rules of the game. So long since decided, never an answer. I mean, you've heard me say, the way we've always done things, never, ever the answer. If you get that answer when you're out practicing somewhere, don't ever take it as the answer. All right. Scalia wrote a concurring opinion. He agreed with everything, but he just wanted to disagree with Justice John Paul Stevens. So he wrote his own concurrence. That's about like Scalia. Let's see, what else we need to hear? Any thoughts on that?
So, I try to usually understand the dissent in cases. I just think he's wrong. He's just like, oh, you know what I mean? There isn't a good argument there at all. And I don't even think it's about applying Bill of Rights to states. I think it's more because he's a gun grabber, really. That's what I think.
Well,
the argument is that there is nothing in the Second Amendment's text, history, or underlying rationale that characterizes it as a fundamental right warranting incorporation through the 14th Amendment. That's essentially what's
right.
Anybody agree with it? I mean, and listen, it wasn't just him. It was also Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sonia Sotomayor.
Well, I think Stevens' arguments were incredibly flawed because they were self-defeating. Now, keep in mind, this is the guy that just a few years ago said that the Second Amendment needs to be repealed. So this decision makes a little bit more sense now under that context of recent history. But he said that, yes, there's a fundamental right to self-defense, but just because a homeowner can have guns to defend themselves, well, gosh, a thug can have a gun to murder people. And then he ironically points to the violence in Chicago as proof of how guns create a social health problem, while ignoring the fact that Chicago had a gun ban. So it's exactly what he wants, and yet he's pointing to the fact that the gun ban is, there's all this violence in a place where there supposedly aren't even guns.
Well, somebody argue against Mr. Grisham.
Please.
That's, that there's nothing in the Second Amendment's text, history, or underlying rationale that characterizes it as a fundamental right. What does that have to do with due process?
I think the damning part is it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms. That's predicated on the former. And just to get around that, the right of the people to keep and bear arms. I mean, that is just a major fiction you have to jump through here.
They're not arguing against Mr. Grisham.
Oh, I thought I was. I thought he was totally against the Second Amendment.
No, you're right. I think that's a fair interpretation. Anybody? Come on. Come on.
I will not take it personal, I promise.
All right. Do I need to call on someone?
I can present an argument that's made.
There's some sentiment in the room that we actually call Miss Hurley. Is that?
Another.
Listen, I am ready and prepared, but you got to be ready for me.
I'm not.
Well, also one of the
At this point,
amici.
it's just
Go ahead. Sorry.
That gun regulation is just as much a fundamental part of our democracy for the states as owning a gun is. So I thought that was a valid point on Stevens. But now I do agree to an extent with the Second Amendment. So.
You disagree that it exists, or
No,
where it's applied?
I agree that it is a right. My philosophy is that the states do have a right to regulate what kind of firearms you own. And I think that Stevens makes a valid point that the states should have the ability to tone in like what areas particularly need what type of firearms. And they're more apt to see who does. Like in cities, I just don't see the need for, here's the word, like an AR-15. But like in the rural areas, we do. I mean, you can't take down a bear with much less than an AR-15. So, but like in the city, I mean, what are you going to shoot but people with that? So.
Mr. Grisham says he should have the right to have a tank. I think Ms. Hurley's right, and that's the debate. Where's the line? Where's the line?
Exactly. So that, Second Amendment was around a time when we just had muskets, so I don't see how revolvers and evil, long guns that have weird attachments on them that I don't understand. I don't know why those should be allowed.
Unless the weird attachment is a bayonet.
Right, exactly. It's a bayonet. That is within the time that this was written, and that is proved. Forget about the puzzle gun for a minute, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. I also know that I do not want Mr. Grisham to have a tank.
Nobody like to have a tank, Mr. Grisham.
Yes. Go ahead.
I think that you have to look at like the propaganda around different guns. Like an AR-15 is barely bigger than a 22. Like my 6.5 Creedmoor has a way bigger bullet than an AR-15 bullet. Like it is way more dangerous.
But the power behind an AR-15 is significantly more. If you shoot a bear with a 22, that bear is going to come back.
I trained with them outside of 100 yards. You're not going to hit anything. Like, well, 300 yards, but still, like the AR-15 is like it's so insignificant to like a 7mm hunting rifle. There's way more power. Like it's like the great like people don't even understand. Like I could bring in a bullet that's an AR-15. And I could bring in a hunting rifle one, and which one's more dangerous? Like, I show everybody. This is the one everybody's so scared.
Give her 10 minutes. She'll have it.
I just think there's a lot of negative propaganda where people don't even realize or understand what it actually is. And like the actual reloading of an AR-15 with the way that they are now, with them being where you have to pull the trigger every time, and it's not an automatic because you have to extremely modify them, and like I highly doubt it's even legal to modify them that way. That you can almost run a bolt action as fast if you have a big enough clip as you can, because it's if you're efficient at it, then there's really going to be no timing difference. Like it might be a couple milliseconds, but it's really not that much. especially if it's a well-oiled machine, like you can do massive destruction with just a hunting rifle. And people are like, oh, AR-15s are so freaking bad, but they're not even that powerful of a rifle. They're not even that deadly.
They're not that deadly.
Well, in the history of the military, the AR-15 is the least
Right.
powerful gun the military has ever used. The least powerful rifle is the AR-15, and the only reason we use it in the military is because of NATO guidelines, because they wanted less destructive guns that wouldn't just blow the enemy away once a bullet went through his body. So they chose the AR-15 and the smaller caliber out of touchy-feely warfare.
Okay, least powerful weapon that the military uses.
No, rifle.
That's not a useful guide for what I should do.
Look at big sporting goods, for example, and academy sports. They banned the ARs largely in the wake of some of the shootings that happened. And when you go in there, you can find a Ruger that shoots .223 that has the same amount of ammo, that's just as accurate, but it looks so nice on a wall. It looks like you're just smoking a cigar on your porch and you're going hunting because it's a nice wood finish. It's not scary looking, but it's the same thing as the AR, except for it's a different brand and looks different. And that's Academy Sports, who claims that they're against assault rifles and stuff. Both Academy
My
and
thing is, like, people always ask, how many guns do you have? I don't know, right? I don't. But the thing is, as a government business, no matter if I live in a giant city or if I live in Grundy, I'm gonna carry a gun with me everywhere I go and nobody can do anything about it. You know what I mean? Why is the government's business tell me what caliber I can have and can't have? Because that's what they're saying, 223 isn't that big. I mean, I have a 50 cal. Like, it's, you know, like it's not their business to tell me what caliber I can and can't have.
That's the debate. Where do you draw the line? As with so much of this, that's the debate. Where do you draw the line? Everyone agrees that it can be regulated under the Second Amendment. There's the debate. Where is it?
I think you can draw a line at training, like people in the military who have experience with these type of guns, like maybe they have a little bit more able access to those type of weapons other than an 18-year-old that has had no training, like, hey, I'm just gonna go get an AR.
So you're suggesting that I shouldn't be able to have a gun, but Ms. McKinley and Mr. Grisham should?
No, I'm saying that you should have a certification to have a certain type of powered gun. And they might have that just because they have military experience versus.
So the government can tell me what I can and can't have.
No, I'm saying you just have to get a little bit of training eventually for it. I'm not saying that it's gonna stop you, just, we need to make sure as a society that you know how to use that weapon properly. And I think that's fair.
Maybe that's a useful way to look at it. Ms. Valdez.
I went through training and I remember several 18, 19, 20, 30-year-olds getting tackled at the range that got their certification and have that level of training because they were flagging people because they didn't know how to use their weapons and they have those certifications. So I don't know how, like, more qualified you would be just because of that training. So I've been through that training and I've seen those guys and there's a bunch of dumb 18-year-olds that are trigger happy and don't really value the training they get. So I don't know about that certification.
Well, maybe that's a question about the level of training required. But see, that's the whole debate over why should they be able to tell me anything? Well, why shouldn't we be able to require certain training? You know, before you could, that's the whole debate. We're not going to solve it here today, but I think it's useful to have the debate. But it makes some.
I mean, I'm a big gun guy, but I'll admit, I think that promoting good, training, good classes for guns is a good thing. Like, I'm not saying that you should necessarily make it in all cases that you have to do this to be able to purchase a gun, but I think depending on the circumstances, maybe on the legislature side, like when my grandfather in the 50s was a doctor, and they would have people that come in with gun wounds and stuff. Sometimes it was because they basically wouldn't have any training. It would be an accident or something, someone shot their foot. But when he was in school, they actually had programs in public schools that would actually promote gun use and training and safety. And I think we've moved away from where guns are a tool that you can actually bring people up to use properly to where it's like, oh, no, stay away from that. That's bad. We want to discourage people training it. So I think it's a cultural difference.
Question. This may be because I went to school here not here, but a rural area. I was required to take hunter safety. You all required to take hunter safety in school? Say some of you yes, some of you no. I was required to take it in health class. They didn't teach us at that time certain biological things they teach now, but they'll teach us how to use a gun. I know how to keep a gun from going off.
guns and regulations against guns, because like on one side, I was prior military, I love having guns, I like going out shooting, I'd love to get into long range competition shooting. But on the other side of it, like my cousin was in Las Vegas when the shooting happened. Like she was there, and I was supposed to be there. And so I really struggle with that line on, I know I'm not gonna do anything that's illegal with my guns, but how can I say that for everybody else? And like it really comes into the balance, like we've been saying, like what should be regulated and what should be not. Now there was one Christmas that I went and I treated myself about like 8 guns. Should that be allowed? I don't know. But it's like I knew I wasn't gonna do anything, but they let me buy like a shotgun and a long distance rifle and a pistol.
Open your bag. Let me throw another one in.
God bless America.
But there was no check on that. There wasn't a limit on how many guns I could buy that day. And so that part of me, but then it also really irritates me when they're like, you bought a pistol this month, you can't buy another one. That kind of irritates me a little bit. But like, so there is a balance there, but I don't know what it would be if it's a training or if it's, because then it gets into money. Like some of those trainings cost a lot of money. It takes time, so a lot of people can't take off work. And it just like, you're infringing on someone's right to have a weapon because they have to jump through all these hoops, but you're also maintaining the safety of individuals. I just think it's kind of a balance. I've had a lot of people come up to me and tell me, will you take me shooting and teach me how to shoot? And if you've ever gone shooting with me, you know I'm very strict about, okay, here's the line. If anybody walks across the line, you do not have your hands on your weapon. If someone walks across the line, all the guns are unloaded. Like, you never point it at anything but your target. So, like, there is that aspect where I've had a lot of training with safety with firearms, that it's hard for me to detach and say, well, everybody should have a gun, because not everybody has the training I do.
See, you just in the process of that, you really went over the line and back over. I mean, that's the debate. That's the debate.
And that's what I'm saying. I struggle with it a lot because, like, even my uncle, he was so much gun rights, never infringe on gun rights. And then when that happens to his daughter, he's like, well, maybe we need, and do we have to wait until something bad happens? And
Well,
it's a really toss-up, and I have a hard time with it because being in my position, I love guns. Like, I have a lot of them, and I like to shoot. But it's kind of a gray area. It does pull at me morally on what should happen and what shouldn't.
Well, we have this amendment that says this, and so now we're trying to decide how do we protect that liberty that's enshrined in our Constitution. And listen, I don't want to sound too much like Mr. Grisham, but the vast majority of gun owners are law-abiding gun owners. But how do we
Come to the
balance
dark
this
side,
right
Professor
that we have?
Dotson.
What's that?
I said, welcome to the dark side, Judge Dotson.
No, I'm not a gun guy, although I do own a couple, but I'll get to that. But we also have this other part of it where everybody kind of agrees there's some amount of, not everybody, but there's become a consensus, at least in the jurisprudence of it, that there's some amount of regulation that can occur. Where's that line so that we can keep Las Vegas and these school shootings from happening? Is there something we can do to keep it? I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know the answer to that. Let me say, I do own a couple of guns. I'm not a gun guy. She used to talk about what, I don't know, understand any of that. But I didn't have to go through training. I regularly did it. I didn't have to, actually, as a judge, law permitted me to carry concealed, but I did still keep up with that, all the training for a concealed weapons permit, just to, as a judge, as a prosecutor, I felt like I had to carry a gun sometimes with me. But that's the extent of my knowledge about it. I'm not a gun guy, but I had to follow those rules as well. I had deputies trying to smack me around if I didn't.
Well, I think also, like, when I travel, like, I go across a lot of states to go to Montana, and before I go to any state, I always check the gun laws. Do I have to lock up my gun separate from the ammo? Do I have to do this? Do I have to do that? Can I even drive through Illinois without having a felony? And so a lot of times when I'm driving, like, I look up per state what the requirements are for having a gun, and I feel like that's what a responsible gun owner does. Now, if you're
Mr. Charlie just said he doesn't. Nobody should be able to tell him.
Just say you're going to Vermont.
But, like, that's, like, it's part of the responsibility of being a gun owner is knowing the laws. I have my concealed weapons permit, and it says ignorance of the law on it is not justification for, like, breaking it. And you have to check with the state and local authorities to be able to carry it. And I don't think that's an unreasonable requirement for people to know what they can and cannot do and how they can carry it. Like Montana's open carry for most part, but like you can't carry it into a government building.
Do they shun you from a polite society if you're not carrying in Montana?
Just kind of, I guess, tying in a lot of the themes that we've studied and you can see today, like, I don't understand why we can't recognize the Second Amendment as a fundamental right, but also allow the states to regulate them based on what they deem to be appropriate. I mean, we've seen a lot of different laws on a lot of different topics that regulate things based on this kind of like protectionalist.
The police power, health and safety, protect the health and safety of their citizens.
And like, why can't we?
You
do
can't
that
call
for the
something a
states
fundamental
without
right
determining
and in the
what is
same
in the
breath
best interest,
say
and even go as far as to let
it can be
people decide,
regulated.
you know, at the ballot box, that this is what we want our particular town or our particular state to have as regulation. And, you know, I feel like that should be upheld as constitutional. And if you're going to travel to that state, you would have to abide by the protectionist law. And I don't think that that should violate any kind of, you know, clause or doctrine that we've studied so far.
Why do we not have a push to amend, delete, or otherwise amend the Second Amendment? We can do amendments. There's still a way to change the Constitution.
I don't think CNA would allow it. Like, maybe the leaning force not would allow it.
Here, that's good. Yes.
I agree with your thing, that like, there's nothing stopping you from like just popping up and like the state and getting gun releasing. And I know for a fact, when I was like 20 years old, I was an undergrad, went to a gun store in West Virginia, bought a gun for my baby brother who turned 15. The guy knew about it. He was like, "Who's this for?" I was like, "My brother." He's like, "Oh, okay, cool." Hands the brother gun over to my 15-year-old brother. That's it. He's selling an assault gun to a 20-year-old college student to give her 15-year-old brother. Like, it was so easy. One day, like, it had to be.
Again, how much regulation do we allow?
There's a discrepancy in the areas too, though. Like where I'm from, New York, like you couldn't, if you want to get a gun, you can't just go to New Jersey and say, "Oh, I want a gun." You can't just go to like Pennsylvania and say, "Oh, I want a gun," bring it back to New York. Like here, if you're saying like, "Oh, I can go from West Virginia to Virginia or Virginia to West Virginia or where else," like it makes more sense because the states are all similar in certain ways. Like I think the interests of these types of states would be similar as opposed to the interests of these types of states, and that's why they should be allowed to regulate them differently. Because New York is obviously going to be very different in a lot of different ways than West Virginia.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Illinois has really strict gun laws, so people just go down to Indiana for shows to get their guns. Because Indiana has like no regulations.
Virginia is pretty strict, like the Commonwealth is pretty strict about guns. That's why we went to West Virginia.
The reason why this is debate, it's too important to be had within the context of politics because everything gets inflamed in politics. Stupid pandemic got politicized somehow. Everything gets politicized in this country. And this, of course, we can tell from the debate here today, this is a lot of passion on both sides of this. Here at ASL, we really ought to, if you know the history of the school, there was a mass shooting here, that you all might have seen in the news back when it happened before you even thought about going to law school. So how do we prevent those things while also protecting what has been declared a fundamental right?
It absolutely is political because in California, when Reagan was governor of California, when the Black Panthers were marching, they had guns on them. That was when the first gun ban there happened. And that was because, ooh, it's Black Panthers, they've got guns, this is scary, we gotta ban guns. So I'm saying, like, it absolutely is political when you are trying to assert some kind of gun ban because you're targeting some group of people. In California, they were targeting the Black Panthers. And I don't agree with it then, I don't agree with it now.
I have something.
Who was that?
It's Lucas.
It's all yours, then you're next, Mr. Chubb.
So basically, my thought is they basically already replaced the Second Amendment because a lot of people that are against citizens owning guns basically say it's meant for militia. But then in the early 1900s, they created the Dick Act, which basically gave the federal government power over the states and militias. So that's what created the National Guard. So it kind of threw out the whole idea that there was separate military militias for state interests, which they still do serve the states, but it's heavily influenced by the federal government.
Yeah. We may see a resurgence depending on how this election goes here next few weeks, we may see a resurgence of militias. They may, I don't know if it's gonna be on the left or on the right, but somebody's gonna go nuts, in the wake of this. Tertelli, I told you you're next.
Oh, yeah, my big thing, we're talking about Virginia gun laws, different states, big federalism issue. Like CJ was saying earlier, I drive in California, New York, I'm becoming a felon 3 different times technically. I have a permit in 2 states, and Virginia's is weird because they don't require like an actual course. All you have to do is give them like your hunter's ed. I took hunter's ed when I was like 4 years old, I remember it. But I mean, they do teach you like the basic fundamentals, like don't pull the trigger and point it, be like, you know, a lot of it's common sense, it's not that common, but don't dry fire a gun, don't point it at people. I know Diane Feinstein a couple years ago was pointing an AR-15 at a crowd of people with her finger on the trigger, you know. But my Ohio permit is valid in more states because they require, and it's kind of a scam, it's under the guise of, oh, we're gonna teach you how to use a gun. And you basically have to pay like $500 if you go to a course taught by a cop that got fired for beating his wife, give him $500, even though you already know how to shoot a gun probably, you know. And my thing is, when's the last time a gun law stopped the shooting? I can't think of any. So.
Oh, here we go. All right, I'm about to move on.
I'm just saying, it's okay.
Somebody here,
I think the classes that you were talking about, the 100 classes at a young age, that's really good, because I feel like at a young age, if you're taught properly how to use a weapon, you might not be so scared of it when you're older, or when you do either go hunting or whether job field you go into, you kind of have a background on how to use this weapon. Like for me, I didn't have those classes, so my whole life, like I'm pretty intimidated by guns. I'm not a huge fan of them. I own one, but like it's still intimidating to me. But those classes, I think, can change a culture of more acceptance towards them as long as they're used to taking
responsibility, personal responsibility. Yeah, I was in high school, early 90s, and everybody had to take.
Yeah. Oh.
Go. One moment, Mr. Grisham. Yes, that's a great. I don't think I want to give Mr. Grisham the last word on it. But.
No, actually, it's not bad. I grew up. I went to high school a couple years ago, and we had gun safety training in our high school, and I was even on the high school rifle team. And I would personally, and I actually
rifle team.
I was, and I would personally endorse making gun safety a mandatory class for all high school or actually even middle school students, so that everyone understands, because there is a responsibility. If you own a gun, doesn't matter what kind of gun it is, there is an individual responsibility that you understand how to use it safely, and what the implications are if you don't. And it needs to be taught at a young age. And the way that we touch 100% of people, and not just those that buy guns, is by incorporating it into our education system, gun safety and what guns can do and the dangers. I've taught my kids since they were 6 years old about what they should and should not do when they see a gun and how to handle a gun. And that's how we fix the problem. Because if you keep it to where, if you're just going to own a gun, you have to get training. Well, what happens if an untrained person gets it? So I agree with training.
Okay, all right, there we go. I'll let Reverend Grisham talk. Can you ask me that question again, please, Ms. Graves? Yes, let's move on. No, listen, it's important. It's extremely important for the country. It's a really important debate, and this has been, pretty civil compared to most debates on this, and which is what I hope to have in these classes. But it's extremely important. Let's move to Timms versus Indiana. Yay! Again, we're talking about